a reminder to remain on mute, turn off your camera until Q&A. We do have questions. If you submitted a question as you registered, we'll do our very best to address those. Put other questions in the chat. This session is being recorded. It will be posted on our website along with the PowerPoint. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion. Again, we're just going to have our cameras off and our microphones on mute throughout the session. We will leave time at the end to bring your questions forward from the chat box, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to even take some questions that are asked. This is a big topic. It's one that we've heard from parents quite a lot about, and so we're going to jump right in and see how much we can get through in an hour. So co-presenting with me this evening are Leslie Margolis for Disability Rights Maryland, who is just the foremost education law that I know and who I turn to for all advice when it comes to understanding IEPs and legal rights of parents. We're so grateful that she's with us and participating. And Yvonne Cox, who I presented with before, and I'm pleased to invite Yvonne again. She brings her creative mind to some of the tough questions of how we get kids what they need. So I'm pleased that they're presenting with me tonight. Okay, so why this topic? We've been hearing from many families that there seems to be a lack of follow-through on providing accommodations in the virtual environment. We've heard frequently that students don't have access to the supports that they need or the supports that they're used to getting when we're in the building. And parents say their students are falling behind, not because the instruction is too hard often, but because their child's disability affects executive functioning, skills, and those are the very skills most necessary to succeed often in a virtual environment. The skills referenced by parents include such things as organization and planning and time management. And parents mention that they have to monitor their children all day long while they're trying to work and while we're trying to teach our kids to be independent learners. They're constantly, having to nag their kids to stay on top of things, and they're becoming animated. And I think what has parents most frustrated is that teachers are not offering help. It's as if they're not aware that the students are struggling or worse, failing, even when the issues seem apparent through the number of missing or incomplete assignments, attendance issues, or late sign-ons. It becomes a question of whose responsibility is it. Tonight's presentation, I'm just going to ask everybody to mute if you're not muted. Thank you. So tonight's presentation will offer some tips on how parents can strategically discuss and address these issues with teachers and IEP teams. We'll talk about when requests to amend the IEP or that alternative service delivery model, the ASDM plan, may be necessary. And for parents of students with Section 504 plans, the advice will be very similar. 504s also provide accommodations. Okay, so let's get right to it. When looking at your child's IEP, and I did mention that if you have your IEP in front of you, this would be the time to kind of read along with me. There are sections of the IEP, and parents need to know where to look to see if your child's getting what they need. If you look at your child's IEP, the sections go logically. They go like this. First, there's the eligibility information and assessment details in Section 1. And then Section 2 is that present level of academic performance and academic achievement and functional performance. That's all their present levels. Then we get to Section 3, and this section is the section on accommodations. And note that this section on accommodations comes before we even discuss goals for services and service hours. And accommodations are that important. Program modifications are that important. They're all crucial to helping students access the general curriculum and to participate in school alongside their peers without disabilities. And they're so important that IDEA reinforces the use of accommodations again and again. They're included in the requirements of IDEA, definitions and principles, and they're included in 504 plans. And I'll turn it over to Leslie to discuss the legal requirements of the IEP in just a bit. But let's touch briefly on what accommodations are and how they differ from program modifications. Okay, So accommodations are practices and procedures that provide equitable access during instruction and assessments for students with IEPs, students on Section 504 plans, and students who are English learners. Accommodations enable a child to make progress toward goals, to participate in the general education curriculum, and to participate in extracurricular and other non-academic activities. Accommodations mitigate the effects of a student's disabilities. They do not reduce learning expectations. Okay, again, they provide access to the curriculum, to the general education environment, and to those non-academic and extracurricular activities. They lessen the effects of a child's disabilities. For example, while a child might always have sensory processing disorder, the effects of that disorder may be lessened with accommodations such as scheduled non-conditional sensory movement breaks, noise-canceling headphones, a weighted vest, computer screen adaptations. Or while a child may always have executive functioning deficits, the effects may be lessened with accommodations such as timers, task lists, especially design and organized binders, check-ins, check-outs. So you see, it doesn't take away the disability, but it mitigates the effects of it so that children can access the curriculum better. Accommodations do not modify, alter, change content. Okay? Modifications, those alterations or changes that we make, can lower or reduce learning expectations. Accommodations provide that workaround, okay? And parents and IEP teams often use these terms, accommodations and modifications, interchangeably, but they're quite different. So here are just some examples of accommodations, so things that can be offered to your child, agenda books, checklists, visual daily schedule, you'll see those kinds of things. Modifications change what your child is change, make it different than what their typical peers are looking at, are learning, or being taught. So a modification might be an alternative textbook, fewer problems, different method of instruction, hints or clues that aren't given to their general typical peers. Modified materials may be more developmentally appropriate. Modifications can adversely affect students and may have the unintentional consequence of reducing opportunities to learn critical content. So when we change what a child is learning and we lessen the expectations of it, they may move further and further away from their grade level. And that may impact them when it comes time to pass tests on grade level standards or to graduate. So it's very important to keep that in mind. That you understand the difference between an accommodation, which is something that your child needs in order to participate, in order to learn alongside their peers and in the general curriculum, but it doesn't change the content. Okay, common accommodations that we will see on IEPs are those in the areas of presentation, response, setting, timing, and scheduling. If you have your IEP in front of you and you're in section 3, you'll see that on there for everyone. Presentation accommodations include presentation accommodations are those that change the way information is presented. For instance, providing content in audio or video, providing content in large print, reducing the number of items on a page so that a child doesn't have as much to look at, perhaps providing a designated reader, instructions orally, a written list of instructions. These are all just examples. There's many, many more. Response accommodations. These are changes in the way a student might respond. For example, allowing for verbal responses, allowing for answers to be dictated to a scribe, someone that can write them down, permitting responses to be given via computer, or allowing the use of a calculator. Timing and scheduling. I'm sorry, I think I skipped. No, I didn't. Okay. Timing and scheduling accommodations. That clarifies what a student may need in terms of schedule, in terms of time or schedule to complete a test or a project. So So this is where you'll see extended time, providing extra wait time to process information, allowing a child breaks if they need breaks, allowing the test to be given in several, at several different sessions, or if a child needs to take their test only in the morning because that's when they do their best, a specific time of day. All of these accommodations are discussed at the beginning of section 3. Okay, then we come to this most important part, and this is the supplementary aids, services, program modifications, and support sections. This is that chart that you see in your child's IEP in section 3. And this is the section of great importance when it comes to specifying what your child needs on the day-to-day. Supplementary aids and services provide the individualization of supports that allows the student to access and benefit from faith and to be educated in the least restrictive environment. These are not gifts, and they don't need to be earned. They are responses to assess needs. This is where you want to spend a lot of time during the IEP meeting to make sure your child has all the supports necessary in order to make progress on their goals. It's difficult to know what supplementary aids and services your child may need when you're writing your first IEP, or you're transitioning to a new school, or when you're encountering a new learning environment, such as this virtual learning environment brought to us by the pandemic. And while there are lists of accommodations and supplementary aids on the internet, I mean, you can type it in and you'll get all kinds of ideas. Accommodations should be truly individualized and based on your child's needs. Having page after page of unnecessary accommodations will not benefit your child. Rather, assessing your child's needs first, then determining what accommodations are necessary to help them will benefit your child. Okay, so that's our overview of accommodations and modifications. Again, we're going to get to a lot more examples. We're going to do some kind of scenarios and talk about them and what accommodations might help certain kids. But first, I'd like for you to understand the legal requirements and what IDEA has to say about this section of the IEP. So I'm going to invite Leslie to come on now.
Thank you, Beth. So this is the legal definition in the IDEA for supplementary services, and it means aids, services, other supports that are provided in education classes or other education settings. So that may be trips, it may be non-academic but still school-related activities to enable children with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent appropriate, which is the language the law uses, in accordance with the law. Okay, great. So the IDEA requires, can you just go back a slide, Beth? That the IEP contain a statement both of the special education and related services, but also the supplementary aids and services, as Beth said. And in addition to the supplementary aids and services, a statement of the program modifications or supports for school the child. This is really, really important. The IEP is really, for your child, but this is the section that allows you to look at what would enable, what do school staff need in order to be able to serve your child appropriately? Do there need to be modifications to the class set training? Do they need additional support? Whatever supports the school personnel need also get added to the IEP in this section. This is a really powerful part of the law, and it's really helpful to look at both pieces of this and make sure that you're looking at the services your child needs, but also at how this can support the school staff who are serving your child. Supports need to have a description of the service, how often it will be provided, if it's daily, weekly, periodically. If it's daily, is it the whole day or part of the day? The beginning and ending date, how long the service will last, and who will provide it. Is it multiple people? Is it the special ed teacher, general ed teacher, an assistant, related service provider? And there needs to be clarification of where the service will be provided and how it will be provided, how the support will be provided. Because these are that are the team is determining are needed in order for your child to receive a free appropriate public education, in order to receive special education and related services that comprise that free appropriate public education. If your child doesn't get the supplementary aids and services that are on the IEP, your child may not be receiving a free appropriate public education. So the supplementary aids and services, the programmatic modifications and supports are a critical element of what goes into the provision of a free education for your child. So it's the academics, it's the non-academics, it's the functional and academic skills, whatever your child needs to be supported to achieve those goals is the free appropriate public education. And if any piece of that is not provided, then FAPE. And if your child is getting FAPE, then the services may not have been necessary. As Beth was saying, if you have pages and pages of services that may not be necessary, it means you need to look at the IEP again and figure out what's really needed and what may not be. So accommodations during. There is a guidance document from the Maryland State Department of Education, Technical Assistance Bulletin. MSDE has issued a number of technical assistance bulletins throughout the pandemic. And they have issued one called Providing Continuity of Learning to Students with Disabilities During COVID-19. It is clear that alternative service delivery model plans need to include accommodations, supplementary aids and services, program modifications. The team has to look at what can be implemented as it's written in the IEP. Are there any parts of the IEP that cannot be implemented? And if so, what changes are necessary? So guiding questions with regard to supplementary aids and services would be, are there new or different accommodations or supplementary aids and services or program modifications that are needed? There are students who need particular services when they're in the school building who may be learning at home. Conversely, students who may need services now that they're necessary, they're in the school building and there's more support and more structure in place. So it's really important to revisit this issue based on what's going on with distance learning. How will assistive technology be used to facilitate continued progress at home? It may be that your child's getting assistive technology in some form, but it may need a different form, different support, additional support to access distance learning. Are additional specialists needed to assist you and your child to implement the IEP at home? So those kinds of questions need to be asked. Do you need information support or your child learn at home? Parent counseling is one of the related services that can be placed on an IEP and is usually put in that section of supplementary aids and services. Do you need information or support to support your child's social and emotional well-being? Do you need information or support or training to implement behavior interventions or functional skill development at home? So, the behavior specialist can work with you, and maybe your child for implementation at home rather than in school. So those are all additional questions to consider.
Great, thank you, Leslie. Okay, now I'm going to invite Yvonne Cox to come on, and she's going to take us through the next slides and talk a little bit about the accommodations that might be necessary in virtual learning. Yvonne?
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you tonight. When we're looking at accommodations that may be necessary in virtual learning, we really want to think about exactly what Leslie said prior to me. What would a student need right now in this time and space where we find them at home? And as you can see on the bulleted list here, it is the same as accommodations that we would be looking at in the more of a normal operations setting. We're still looking at instructional support, program modifications, social and behavioral support, physical and environmental supports, and looking at personnel and what sort of trainings you may need as a parent or as a home team. So some of those examples may look a little bit different because of virtual learning. Checking in and checking out with a teacher or case manager is something you would see when in normal operations, when in virtual, but it may look a little bit different. You may see extra time and social stories. The use of manipulatives, we may use the term virtual. What is really important is that we're really thinking about how those accommodations are being implemented. So I may need to check in and check out at a specific time of day with my teacher. I may need to have a individualized schedule that allows for me to have my live links embedded in there so that as a student, all I have to do is click that link each day. We really also want to continue to make use of those visuals and pictures, and we often can do that virtually. We want to be clear on how we're implementing accommodations, and that is part of our team process and part of our planning process within our documents to talk about how we address small groups, how we address asynchronous learning, what your student may need in terms of in-home support. And that's really important that we're leveraging our discussion points and documenting how these accommodations look, because they may word the same, but the implementation could look different. And we all need to be really clear about that. And there are also things that we can do to adapt. We do have materials that we can send home. We do have materials within our home that make learning easier. I think about myself with my children and how we use large lined paper, and it just works better for us here. And that's not something my kids access when they go to school. We want to make sure that we are providing what is necessary for a student so that they can continue to make progress. And we also want to make sure that if printed items are what is needed or materials are needed, that IEP teams are having conversations about that.
Okay, so collaborating with the IEP team, and we're going to talk now about the process to address concerns. But the point is, as Leslie's made and as Yvonne has just made, is that whether our schools are fully in person, partially in person, they're talking right now at the Board of Ed meeting about reopening, hybrid, the IEP process remains the same. And when parents have concerns, students are struggling, assignments are missing, grades are falling, then parents should exercise their rights to an IEP meeting or to a 504 team meeting. The 504, the IEP, and the ASDM is not just a one time a year shot to get it right. If it's not working, it should be modified. And we can't stress that fully enough. So we're going to just share a little scenario here. For some parents, this might sound really familiar. And then we're going to talk through some of the questions that we would ask and then what to do about it. So we have a 10th grade student, diploma-bound student, Sally, with an IEP. Generally, she's a solid B student. She's currently receiving Ds in every class since the first quarter of the year. Canvas shows missing, late, or incomplete for the majority of her assignments. Her parents have stopped nagging her because her anxiety is so high, and she shuts down every time they ask about school. Her parents are at a loss on how to help her. She needs help managing her schedule and prioritizing her assignments. She also needs help communicating with her teachers when she's unable to complete an assignment. She's afraid to speak up or ask for help. So the first step would be to look at the IEP, Section 3, and to ask some of these questions. Are the challenges related to her disability of autism, ADHD, generalized anxiety, or whatever the disability is for the student? That's what we've identified her with. So are the challenges, are some of those things that are happening, are they related to her disability? And are there accommodations, supplementary aids, or program modifications in place already that should be supporting Sally with some of these executive functioning deficits? So you just want to go down that list of accommodations, go down that list of supplementary aids and ask yourself, are they already in there? Same for the ASDM plan. If you had an ASDM plan that said, you know, all accommodations will be provided, or supplementary aids that cannot be provided are XYZ. Again, you're going to want to note that on the ASDM. So do your research. Find out if your child should be getting these accommodations already, or if there was some reason why they couldn't be implemented during the alternative service delivery. Then document your concerns in writing and be specific. Talk to the teacher, include in your email what's happening, what you're noticing, what's not being provided that should be. Refer to the IEP and the ASDM and use quotes, quote the accommodation that should be provided, how often it was supposed to be provided, who was supposed to be providing it. Ask questions about it. If your child should be having a daily check-in with a case manager and that hasn't been happening, refer to the accommodation page. It's in here. This should be happening. We've noticed on all these dates it hasn't been. Ask questions about it. Request a meeting to then discuss your concerns with the case manager or with a specific teacher, or if necessary, the 504 team or the entire IEP team. Informal conversations may solve problems. You can, have a talk with one teacher. It's just the science teacher that's not helping with the agenda book, or whatever the accommodation is. So you might just have a conversation and then follow up in writing. Send an email to just clarify what you understood the discussion to be and your understanding of what the solution will be. So that if the teacher said, nope, you know what, we'll do a daily check-in with her. We'll make sure that she is turning in her assignment, or if she has questions, she can ask us at, this time of day, and just put that in writing so that that's the understanding. That's what you're coming away with. If you can agree on outcomes, then you'll know how progress is going to be made. You can talk about that, like, how will we know that progress has been made? Will her grades go up? Will she, turn in all of her assignments on time? You need to know what the outcome is, what the outcome you expect is, and you've agreed on is, and how you're going to get there. I'm so sorry that I'm not forwarding these things, but these are the questions that we just talked about. Looking at the ASDM plan, emailing the teacher or case manager, talking with them, agreeing on outcomes, and then requesting an IEP team meeting. So IEP team meetings ensure that discussions and agreements are documented. The amendments can be made to either the IEP, can be made to the IEP and to the ASDM plan if necessary. And again, at that meeting, you'll agree on the outcomes and how you'll all know that progress is being made or the issue has been addressed.
Beth, can I make a really comment about this scenario?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is a really point that I made earlier about how sometimes there may be supplementary aids or services that are necessary in distance learning that aren't in the school setting. is because we know that for a lot of students, there are particular issues that are coming up with distance learning and anxiety around being on camera or not feeling comfortable raising concerns, as Sally seems to be with her teachers. So there may be very specific accommodations that can be added to her IEP for this period of time when learning's occurring through distance, like, you know, putting her questions in the chat box or not being on camera the whole time, you know, having other accommodations that are not necessary when students are in the brick and mortar building. So I just wanted to point out it's a really nice example of when you might want new or different services in place.
And then finally is tracking progress. Did anything change? What changed? Did things improve? And how do you know that they improved? And if things still have not improved, then do you need to call another meeting? Or do you need to go outside of your school team? Yvonne Cox is a great resource. She's in the Department of Special Education, the central office. And there's a whole host of resource teachers and instructional facilitators there that can often help teams when they're not thinking as creatively as they need to be. We know there are so many challenges right now in virtual. We know that kids are struggling, and we need as many people brainstorming with us in order to help them. And so if you've talked to your team and you've gotten nowhere, don't stop there. Don't allow your child to continue to fail or to continue to struggle, to have anxiety. Don't stop there. Call on the central office if necessary. If you need further advocacy, there's many of us that can help with that too. But the point is, you know, parents will often say, my child's not doing well in virtual. And when I ask them specifically not what is not going well, they're hard pressed to come up with what it is, other than just say they're failing. And so we need parents to be really specific about what's not working and what could help. And again, that's the responsibility of the school, but you're an important member of that IEP team. And so your input is critical to that. Okay, so let's see where we've gotten to. All right, so resources. The Maryland State Department of Education has a policy manual all around accommodations. The link is there, but if you just type it in, you know, MSDE, Maryland Accommodations Policy Manual, it will come up, and it's a PDF. And there are many ideas of accommodations in there. And as I said, you can find lists upon lists on the internet as well. And the idea is not to go down the menu and just check off all of those that you think would be helpful, but really to think about what the need is. And then if you're stuck on what might help your child, then look there. You know, that it is a very helpful resource. And then I just put a slide up here just to let you know that there are other resources available from the Howard County Autism Society. We have all the COVID-19 resources having to do with virtual learning and all of MSDE's technical assistant bulletins that are up there. And finally, IEP assistance is available. We offer it free from the Howard County Autism Society, one-on-one conversations. The Family Support and Resource Center through the school system offers support, and Parents Place of Maryland has Pick a Time, again, free one-on-one IEP discussions with advocates. And then, of course, our CCAC also can help out. So with that, we have come to questions, and many of the questions that were asked in advance, we have incorporated in one way or another here, and hopefully we've addressed it. I welcome you now, if you have questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat box so that we can bring them forward. I just ask that they stick to the topic of accommodations. We had some people that wrote in about data collection, and we had some parents write in about topics such as service hours not being met. Those are different discussions, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody. individually on those discussions, but for the sake of this presentation and this recording, any questions that you may have on specific to accommodations in your child's IEP. We did have one parent ask about accommodations heading into college and making sure that a student has what they need for college. And I would just say that the adult world is a self-advocacy world. So once your child is 18 and in college, they will need to advocate for themselves and what their needs are. So colleges have disability support offices, but the student needs to be able to request the accommodations that they need. So if they need extended time, if they need teachers' outlines, whatever the accommodation is that they're accustomed to having in high school and has proved very effective, for them, they can have a 504, they can have accommodations in college, but they have to be able to advocate for them. There are no IEPs in college. Okay, so I'm going to ask Yvonne and Leslie to jump in for any of the questions that are being asked as well, since I've been doing so much of the talking. One question that we have forward is, can accommodations be updated after a transition meeting, elementary to middle school? Not sure if the needs will change between the two and after virtual learning. So this is a great question because we know that as we go back into schools, even parents will have learned a lot about their children and school from having watched them for the past year almost at home. So Yvonne, do you want to jump in here and talk about this process of how we, might update IEPs, update accommodations, reconsider, what accommodations might be needed now that we're back in school after, what may be a year?
Sure. I'm going to address this question first, which is centered around transition. And one of the things that occurs is that an annual transition meeting will occur when a student is matriculating from one level to another. And so elementary to middle is a switch, right? And so you're talking to somebody who has experience at both levels. And so we do find that actually we do have to really take a look at the accommodations. We actually look at the entire IEP at that annual transition meeting. It's an opportunity where elementary and middle are together at the table, and we talk about who is the student and what updates may need to be made to the IEP. So it is actually a great time to make amendments, or it becomes an annual because we are making so many changes for some of them, for some of the IEPs. And so it's a perfect time to be talking about what supplemental aids and services may need to change based on things that are just occurring in middle school. There are much more transitions in middle school. And so we have to think about what a student may need throughout their day. And so we find a lot of supplemental aids and services, and we really do go through those one by one and think about what the student, and anticipate what the student may need based on the data that we have. There will likely be changes when virtual learning is over. And so we want to make sure that we are considering your data that you're taking at home and what you know about your student, so that we can infuse that into the accommodations and supplementary aids and services. We want to make sure that the student is prepared and ready and can have full access to the learning that is going to occur. So we may find that we are having to make updates and change documents as students are moving from one learning environment to another.
Yvonne, are you able to see the chat box?
I can see it.
Okay, so do you want to take the next question, and then I'll have Leslie take the third question. So the next question is about a kindergartner who needs mom buy-in.
I'm going to read it out loud if that's okay. My child's in kindergarten and he needs me to sit with him so that he can stay focused on the lesson. He needs constant engagement so he's able to stay focused. I have to work and I have other children at home. What kind of accommodations can we expect? So far, the school has not been very supportive. So the first thing we need to do is address the concerns to the school, which it sounds like you did. And I'm sorry to hear that the school hasn't been supportive. So I want to acknowledge that. And we have to look at what does the student require and what could we do to help support that student at home. And your child may require close adult supervision. I'm not sure if that is an accommodation or a supplemental aid, listed in your child's documents. But if it is, we have to address that and talk about how we're going to engage him further and what kind of support does he need. Does he need more check-ins? Does he need more opportunities to either verbalize, or does he need more opportunities for visual learning? Does he need more checklists? And or do you need home supports, and does your child qualify for home support? And so what kind of accommodations can you expect? That depends on what your child requires in order to meet his needs. But there are a variety of supplemental aids that can be provided. And if you need to speak further with someone in central office about that, kind of as Beth was mentioning before, there are a whole team of people who work alongside me in a variety of schools that have some ideas around, okay, what could we do to help the student maximize their learning opportunities? And there are a variety of accommodations that we can use. I would say maybe the most structured would be in-home supports, and then the least structured would be some of those chunking of information or giving a personalized checklist, or ensuring that the student isn't having to sit for multiple sessions, synchronous sessions, on breaking up the work a little bit and breaking up the interaction. So there's a variety of supports that can be provided.
And Yvonne, I would just add, this is where we go to the importance of being really specific with the teacher as to, if you were to provide an example, is it across his or her entire day? Is it one period of the day? Is it, during the morning or the afternoon? Can we look at the schedule? Do we need to talk a little bit more specifically about the schedule and when he is least engaged? I mean, this is that the importance of when you're talking with your team, to try to be as specific as possible so that they can come up with solutions that are specific. So that's that. Okay. Leslie, would you like to take the next question? The next question is, I've noticed, or has the parent comments that she's noticed benefits of remote learning for her student with an IEP, and also some cons, some pros and cons, and recognizes that they'll be different in the school environment. So with the push now for hybrid learning, can we request that IEPs be updated for what those aids and supplemental services will look like for the remote and in-schooling learning days?
Absolutely. The IEP is, or a 504 plan, are never written in stone and can be updated any point. So particularly when you have new information, as it sounds like you do, absolutely, you can request an IEP meeting and update the supplementary aids and services. You can update goals and objectives. You can update related services. Always, if something has changed or you have concerns, you can request an IEP meeting. So this is a perfect situation where you're going to want to make changes. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, any other questions? We have one that we are asking to be translated from one of our translators. I really thought there'd be a lot more questions. Maybe we got it all in the PowerPoint then. What resources are available for help with accommodations on college? Okay, so I just mentioned that And again, this is depending on what the accommodations were that helped your student in school. Your child is going to want to have that conversation. Your young adult now is going to want to have that conversation with the disability support services office at the college to take a look at what supports were necessary in school and helpful, and what may be necessary in college. But because students don't have an IEP, they're covered under Section 504 in college and across the lifespan. That student would have to be able to advocate for what he or she needs. So if he, needs extended time on assignments, that would be an accommodation that may be provided, and then he would have to be able to communicate that to his teachers, to his professors. So really working on those self-advocacy skills is very important. And the Disability Support Office can help with that. So they would inform the professors and, again, work together to make sure your student has what they need.
So Beth, this is Leslie, and I'm going to jump in and give a little bit of free advice that is related, but it is related to this, and that is the self-advocacy. The self-advocacy piece is huge. As Beth said, when students hit college, you as the parent are not going to be able to have a relationship. Your child is an adult and will be treated as an adult, and you don't even have access to their records. You don't have access to staff. They won't talk to you unless your child gives them permission. So the self-advocacy is really key, and waiting until your child gets to college is kind of late. So we often at DRM, I often in my cases for transition age students, and even starting in middle school or earlier, begin that process of teaching self-advocacy skills as thinking ahead to transition. It's very much a transition skill that it can start earlier. So if I have a client to, as Sally was, to ask for help from teachers, we will start that. We will look at that as a self-advocacy issue, that if Sally doesn't understand something, being able to raise her hand and ask a question, or being able to go up to a teacher and say, I don't understand this, can you explain it to me, is the first step in being able to exercise that self-advocacy skill. So it's really never too early to start learning those skills. And if you have younger children, I would encourage you to start looking at that as it's not so much a supplementary aid or service as it is a goal to put on the IEP. It's something that kids have to learn how to do, and it doesn't come naturally to many of us. So you might want to think about that.
Thanks, Leslie. Yvonne, can you jump in on the question about the resource teacher and maybe how to get additional support, even if a resource teacher has been involved and you're still not getting, what you may need in terms of support?
Sure. And I also want to speak a little bit about data and reporting. And, we all are in a place where we may be collecting data. Of course, as parents, we can't require you to or suggest that you do, but you may have data based on your student learning in your home environment that you would have likely not have had if we were in school. And I encourage you, and we all encourage you, to bring that data. That's part of the experience of coming to the table as an informed parent. And so we have a responsibility to hear the data and consider the data that you bring as a parent, as well as the data that we report as a school. And so sometimes those are in concert, and that's when it goes really well. And then sometimes they're not in alignment. Sometimes a student may over or underperform on the school's measures, and then the opposite is true at home. And so we need to be having those conversations and documenting that appropriately, both in the IEP and to each other, to talk about where is the disconnect, why maybe, or am I seeing something different at home than the school team is seeing through the use of a platform like, for example, Pear Deck or some of the other ways that we get information from students. Additionally, I'm glad to hear that you're accessing your resource teacher and that she's available to be at some IEP meetings, and there's been a level of consistency there. I encourage you to continue to reach out to have that dialogue about where maybe that disconnect is happening. If you continue to sort of have a disconnect with the team, you can always leverage other people within our department. And so it's always helpful to start with your school's resource teacher. So again, I'm glad that she's involved, because they can start to conceptualize and think about, when would my team get involved in terms of instructional intervention, or when might we call someone from instructional access to consult with us, or perhaps I might meet with someone in related services to consider what we may do or tweak. And it's helpful to have that perspective. And so yes, you absolutely can and should email the resource teacher, especially since she's already been involved, and continue that discussion about where that disconnect may lie.
And I'm gonna actually see if we can post. We have a chart that Dr. Savage gives us at the beginning of each school year that shows all the schools and the resource teacher and the instructional facilitator that is assigned to that school. So you can just find your school and you'll know exactly who to contact if you need support outside of your school. And a couple parents have commented that virtual learning is actually going very well for their kids. And that's, for some disabilities, that's not a thing at all. And for some individual students, that, it isn't surprising. So my understanding is that kids won't be forced to go back to school as long as the hybrid model and virtual is being offered. Yvonne, is that correct? So as for the rest of the school year, they're just, I guess, the hybrid model and how long that will continue. Have an update on that?
So there is a board meeting happening right now as we speak, and things are ever changing. But right now, today, at 7:23 p.m., parents are permitted to make a choice for virtual versus hybrid. And so that's the most timely information I can give you. However, things change in this time and space we find ourselves in. Things are changing rapidly, and I always encourage us to take a look at our Board of Ed and their decisions. But right now, today, parents will have a choice to go hybrid or virtual.
Okay, and then the question a parent asked, and this is a question that we have heard and received from many parents, is the question about one-to-one support. We know many kids, when they're in the school building, benefit from an adult support and paraprofessionals, and that many kids are struggling at home without them, and parents are having to serve as that paraprofessional. So our understanding is that Howard County is considering one-to-one support, but for some students, but there is a process by which that consideration is made. And so teams are going to want to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to provide as much assistance as possible to provide these accommodations and supports that might help before they get to that discussion as to whether your child is a child that qualifies for in-home support. And keep in mind that when the school system is talking about sending in a one-on-one, if they were to be able to send in one-on-ones for every student that needed it, it could be a temporary employee or somebody, it would not be a special educator, and it could be somebody that does not yet know your child. These are big issues. It's a big discussion for teams when children really are struggling and they're not able to receive faith, they're not able to access their learning or instruction because they don't have that support. Absolutely, I encourage you, talk with your teams, document the times, document the difficulty, and call an IEP meeting if you feel that's absolutely necessary to discuss. Okay, so I'm looking here at our chat to see if there are any other questions here. Melissa just posted the chart with the assignment of resource teachers and instructional facilitators in the chat. That can be found on the Howard County Autism Society's website on our Special Education News Center as well, for anybody that is listening to the recording. Okay, and Yvonne, do you want to speak to the comment about frequency as daily as appropriate, and how to get clarification around that for
Sure thing.
For a student that may need more support may be necessary?
Sure. I'm wondering if a way to describe how a supplemental aid will be implemented, if it couldn't be for every task, because not every task allows for the supplemental aid, but yet as appropriate doesn't really describe when I would implement the said supplemental aid. If we could have a discussion, there are multiple places in the IEP for us to discuss how we would implement something that may not be as clear as every day I'm going to give Yvonne a checklist that gives her no more than 5 tasks that she's got to do before she has a check-in, right? Like, that's very clear. But as appropriate may not be clear enough. And the idea is that anyone can pick up this document and implement with ease. And so perhaps what we need to do is have a conversation about what is as appropriate and how do we put some context to what would be appropriate. And then as we're having those discussions, we may find that it's another supplemental aid, it's a discussion and a clarification that we provide. So I think there is a happy medium in this where maybe it doesn't align to every task, but as appropriate isn't really clear enough so that anyone can implement and so that everyone is understanding the document. The document is only as good as everyone's understanding of how to implement it.
I think that's a really great point, Yvonne. And generally, our rule of thumb, or what I've always said is, somebody's got to be able to pick up that IEP and understand it. And if everybody on the team who knows the child chips in to buy a lottery ticket and power a whole new crew of them to serve the child, they have to be able to pick up that IEP and understand what to do with a student. And because so much of what happens seems to reside in people's heads and not document. So if the document's not clear or it doesn't specify all the services that are being child, if those disappear, then all that knowledge disappears with them. So that's another reason why the document itself is so important and needs to be clear. So thanks for saying that.
Okay, and so with that, we have answered our questions with regards to accommodations that have been brought forward. Again, for families that had put questions in the registration box and it wasn't on the topic of accommodations, I will reach out to you and offer an opportunity for us to speak if you're interested. Otherwise, we thank you so much for joining us this evening. The presentation will be posted on the Howard County website, on the Howard County Autism Society website. And perhaps we can even have it put on the Department of Special Education's website at some point there as well. The slides will be uploaded along with the recording. And we will be translating the slides into Spanish as well and posting those as well. So thank you again for joining us, and please continue to let us know what topics are of interest to you so that we can continue offering these webinars and working together to help you. Okay, thank you so much.